Hello and welcome. The first thing I would recommend anyone do is jump in and play the updated tutorial. It'll go through all kinds of things like the hero deck, upgrading armor, swapping heroes, all the basics that you would need to know, and you'll get a cool cosmetic at the end of it just for playing through. Even if you're a very serious, highly skilled professional gamer, absolutely just play through the tutorial. The best early game hero deck in my opinion is an Apprentice, Huntress, Monk, and EVA. Save the Squire for later. Leveling new heroes in Nightmare Survival takes a fraction of the time, and he's a really good tank in the mid game, which I consider all of Nightmare and Massacre campaign. For the record, early game I would define as anything before level 70 and anything before Nightmare. If you really want to include the Squire in your initial playthrough in your hero deck, I would swap him in for the Huntress. I used her the least but came to rely on her toward the end of early game, and her crowd control traps are practically mandatory in mid-game. The EVA is the strongest active hero for early game. She has the highest jump height, can drop a decoy to help you get out of trouble, and has great HP scaling, and she can use the Huntress and Apprentice weapons. Playing a hero during the combat phases gives you a 33% damage bonus on any defenses you build with them, and you'll want to build a whole bunch of her defenses early game. The EVA's proton beams are busted. Make big X's or slant a single 5DU beam through every lane, drop in snares in the middle of them once you have some range on your Monk, and that lane is pretty much good. This alone will carry you through the medium and hard campaign if your beams adequately cover enemy pathing. Just follow the little purple tracer line through the lane and you'll know where the enemies are headed. If an ogre's coming, add a wall at the end of the beams. Check the spawn door to see where the ogres are coming from. A reflect beam can help too. They can be 1DU and reflect back all enemy projectiles. If you really want to play it safe and you're not sure what to do, you can wall off the crystals. It'll give you some time to deal with the enemies you didn't account for with your build. If the lane or choke point is short or it's a corner, add an explosive trap. They hit hard and have a big blast radius, but they're more high maintenance than proton beams until you have some better stats. They're also useful near your walls or the end of your proton beams for in case enemies are slipping past or the beams don't quite take them out. If you have the DU to spare and your EVA is over level 20, buff everything with an overclock. If you plan out your lane a little bit, you can buff everything with a single 4DU overclock beam. More damage for everything, more range on your traps and auras, and armor for the wall. Flame Burst towers hit hard and do splash damage, but they can be attacked and some enemies are immune to fire damage. Use them if you can put them somewhere safe. Once your Apprentice is level 15, use Deadly Striker towers for killing ogres and bosses. They have insane range, hit really hard, never miss, and shoot through walls. Stash them behind stuff, around corners, or anywhere safe. They're very fragile. A Strength Drain aura can make a lane safer by reducing the damage enemies can do to defenses. It'll also strip away elemental immunity from enemies, making Flame Burst towers and other elemental defenses more effective. Every defense mentioned here so far, aside from the Flame Burst tower, deals physical damage, so don't worry about elemental resistance. Nothing is immune to physical damage until Massacre difficulty. Ensnare auras are poison based, so keep in mind there will be a few enemies who are immune to them too. These are the main defenses I would suggest for use in early game, but if you want to experiment, darkness and gas traps can be useful as additional crowd control tools. Magic missile towers are cheap physical damage with good range, and the Squire's spike blockades and harpoons are great defenses if you want to experiment outside of the meta. It's possible to solo the campaign from level 1 with just a Squire. I would avoid the rest of the defenses for now though, as they're either very situational or far more useful later on. Upgrading the same defense multiple times will cost increasingly more mana, but increases their damage, duration, and health the same amount each time. Start with upgrading your damage dealing defenses once or twice since it's the best value. Keep your walls at level 1 and use the upgrades to quickly repair them as needed. Ensnare auras, Strength Drain auras, and other crowd control defenses are a low priority for upgrades. Only upgrade them if they don't have enough health to make it through the wave and you can spare the mana. The stats for your characters are divided up as hero stats and defense stats. Adding points to your defense stats is your main priority at the start. You get free stat points in the form of rune power for leveling up that you can move in and out of your stats however you'd like. Most of your stats will come from these points early on. Each stat has diminishing returns. Adding additional points results in smaller increases the more points you already have. For example, you'll see a greater increase in range on your towers from your first 40 points of range on your Apprentice than you'll see in the following 200 points invested. The earlier points give you much more value. This is true for every stat. I'll give recommended ratios for stat investment on each hero, but they are by no means set in stone. For the EVA, put most of your points into power and some into fortify. Ignore range and defense rate until you start using overclock beams. Even then, keep those points at a small fraction of your power and fortify. Range does nothing for your protons and walls. Defense rate scales really poorly, so a few points go a long way. Power scales much better for DPS on your protons. Fortify will add HP to your walls and protons, making them easier to maintain. If you're having a hard time keeping your protons alive for the whole wave, you need more Fortify. An easy ratio to follow while you're using lots of proton beams for damage with some walls is 4 power to 3 Fortify. When you start using walls more and protons less, as you're shifting into mid-game, go with something like 5 Fortify to 3 power to 1 range to 1 defense rate. The power then is more for the bonus on your overclock beams. Stat priority for the Huntress is very similar to the proton-focused EVA, except range actually makes a big difference for traps. Power is the main stat, followed by Fortify to get more charges for her explosive traps. An easy ratio to follow for her stat investment is 3 power to 2 Fortify to 1 range. Feel free to stop adding Fortify though if you have enough charges on her explosive to last an entire wave or two. A few points into defense rate isn't a bad idea, but it's a really low priority because going heavy into defense rate means you're sacrificing range or power to burn explosive traps down faster, making them harder to maintain. The points are better spent elsewhere. Fortify also adds duration to gas and darkness traps should you choose to use them. For the monk, go heavy on range right away. Auras start out really small, but they get bigger fast. I recommend sticking with only ensnares with the occasional strength drain aura in the early game, neither of which benefit from defense rate, so it's safe to ignore. Fortify is the next most important stat after range. If you're having trouble keeping the auras alive for the whole wave, add Fortify. Ensnares and strength drains don't need much power to be useful, just add a few points here and there. An easy ratio to follow is 4 range to 2 Fortify to 1 power. If you do want to use electric auras, you'll need more power and some defense rate. Range and power are equally important at first for the Apprentice, followed by defense rate. An easy ratio to follow at first would be 2 power to 1 range to 1 rate until 35 range, after which just gauge how much range you'll need, build to build, swap rune power points in and out of range as needed. Small maps like the Alchemical Lab need far less range than large maps like Lava Mines or the Summit. Feel free to calibrate your range stats as needed. If you're placing your towers well and keeping them safe, they won't be getting hit, so you shouldn't need any Fortify, but it's not a bad idea to put a few points in here and there. The same principles can be applied to a squire's harpoons if you're using them, though he would need some Fortify if you wanted to use his spike blockades too. The casting stat affects how quickly your heroes can build, repair, and upgrade defenses. If you're playing the campaign with hardcore off and don't have a build timer, it only matters for your active hero, since you'll have as much time as you'd like to build with your other heroes during the build phase. With hardcore on and a build timer, you'll want every hero to be able to build quickly. By the end of the Insane campaign, I wound up with 40 casting on each hero. Add some points to it here and there if you feel like your heroes are building too slowly, especially if you're playing campaign maps with hardcore enabled for better loot. For your active hero, some points into attack will go a long way. When I was farming the Summit on Insane to hit level 70 and unlock Nightmare, I had 50 points in my attack stat and it made my weapon deal way more damage. Consider adding a few points here and there throughout your playthrough so your active hero can do more damage. Being able to deal considerable damage with your active hero will make killing ogres and larger enemies and any enemies your defenses may have missed much easier. Make sure you go to your auto loot filters and check every box when you first start so every piece of gear gets auto looted. That way you don't have to run around and pick everything up manually. Just equip whatever gear you can at first, but mainly you're on the lookout for defense stats. Your EVA is the main priority early on, so give her the best gear. After running 5 or 6 maps, you'll start to accumulate a lot of items. You'll want to start putting together matching sets for everyone to take advantage of the bonus that adds an additional 40% to the stats gained from your armor. I would recommend against putting everyone in minor even though it's guaranteed to have power. Militia is guaranteed to have attack and guard is guaranteed to have vitality, both of which are very useful to have on your active hero. Having a set of either on your EVA with good defense stats would be great. Primitive is guaranteed to have agility, which improves movement speed but hard caps at 100, and ancient is guaranteed to have skill, which scales with your hero's ability. It's a really good idea to diversify which sets your heroes are wearing so you can take advantage of as many good pieces as you can while still maintaining the set bonus. Any piece of gear can roll with any stats, so just put together sets with lots of high priority defense stats for each hero. It really doesn't matter who wears what set since armor stats are all RNG outside of the guaranteed stats on each set, and most of your points will be coming from room power early on anyway. But if I had to recommend a set for each hero based on those guaranteed stats, and I had good pieces for every set, I would say put the EVA and Apprentice in Guard or Militia since they are the best active heroes in early and mid game. They would both benefit from having attack or vitality. Put the Monk in Ancient because later on you may use him as the active hero for his tower boost ability that scales with skill, which is guaranteed on Ancient armor. Put the Huntress in Minor because it's guaranteed to have power and that's her main stat. Finally, save the Primitive with the best hero stats, mainly attack, vitality, skill, and boost for your first dedicated DPS or tank hero whenever you make one. All that said, it's better to just go through all your drops every 3 or 4 maps, use the best pieces from every set across your heroes, and sell all the rest. Armor comes easy early game and you'll be swapping out pieces pretty frequently. As such, it's generally not worth spending gold to upgrade armor beyond the first 2 or 3 points until you're about ready to break into Nightmare. Upgrade points on your armor get progressively more expensive, so don't waste your gold maxing out early game armor. Save it for a weapon instead. If you're playing through the campaign, before every boss fight, I'd recommend putting a point or 2 into your best armor pieces on each hero and dumping the rest of your gold into a good weapon or upgrading your current weapon. In my opinion, the best early game weapon is a staff with an upgradable projectile count and high base ranged damage. When you're picking your first staff to invest in, just pick the one with the highest base ranged damage that you have, that you're also able to upgrade the projectile count on, and level it as much as you can. Just level projectile count whenever it's unlocked. With each additional projectile, your DPS potential goes up by a lot. You'll have to fight at mid-range to land all your projectiles, but the DPS is worth it in my opinion. If you want a safer but harder to find option with less DPS potential, go with a minigun or a paintball gun that you can upgrade the fire rate on and apply the same principles. The biggest problem with going that route is that you won't be able to give the weapon to your Apprentice if you want to run him as the active hero when you start moving away from protons and toward DSTs as the primary damage dealing defense. Not only would the Apprentice then give the active builder bonus to the DSTs for better damage, he's also able to overdrive all defenses aside from auras with his secondary attack while his hero boost is active, giving them much faster attack rate. This makes him a far better support hero than the EVA. Start with the campaign. I would recommend playing through on medium at first, especially if you're new to the series. If it feels too easy, just switch to hard. You don't have to finish medium if you don't want to, and hard isn't that much harder. Feel free to toggle hardcore on for some better loot, but I'd recommend keeping it off for the boss maps the first time at least, since you won't respawn if you die and you'll lose all the mana you had when you do respawn. I'd stay away from playing Rifted until Nightmare. It's significantly more difficult and you'll need a ton of Rifted runs in a bunch of different maps to really take advantage of the rewards. It'll drag out the early game quite a bit and I don't think it's worth it, but give it a shot if you want an extra challenge. After completing the hard campaign, the entire Insane campaign is unlocked. From here, you can do whatever you want to hit 70, but you'll need a level 70 hero and to beat the summit on Insane campaign to move on to Nightmare. Personally, I enjoyed replaying the whole campaign on Insane and then running the throne room and the summit a few more times on Insane campaign for more gear until I hit 70. The victory chests after killing the bosses guarantee accessories, brooches from Alk Labs, bracers from the throne room, pets and masks from the the summit. Instead, you could run any of the endurance game modes, pure strategy, survival, or mixed mode, with Ancient Mines being the easiest map to push deep waves on. Either way, once you hit 70 and beat the summit on Insane Campaign, you're ready to take your first steps into mid-game and move on to Nightmare. That'll do it for this one. Any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and thank you so much for watching.